As I mentioned earlier, today we're lucky to have Malcolm Middleton, the Queensland Government Architect, here to present. The Queensland Government announced Malcolm Middleton as the new Queensland Government Architect back in July 2011, so he's been in the job 8 years now, which is a pretty amazing legacy in that position. The Queensland Government Architect provides advice to the Queensland Government on contemporary design and heritage issues. The Queensland Government Architect also supports innovative designs for government buildings and encourages opportunities for regional architects and the further development of regional design. Malcolm has over 30 years' experience in urban design, master planning and architecture. He started his career with Lend-Lease, then went on to gain experience across many project types and sectors. A former Queensland President of the Property Council of Australia, Malcolm served on a number of panels and council. He served on the South Bank Advisory Panel for 6 years and on the Queensland Heritage Council for 2 years, and is on the Development Committee for the Queensland Heritage Council for 4 years. It's actually my first interaction with Malcolm. He probably doesn't remember this. Back in the mid-80s, I was a fourth-year architectural student. On Wednesday evening, Malcolm used to come in at 7 o'clock and entertain us for 2 hours on professional development and his insight into the development world. So it was very interesting. No one fell asleep. It was a very fascinating 2 hours on a Wednesday. So please welcome Malcolm along today.
Good, thanks, John. I actually didn't know you were in that class, so it's funny when you do that. I did that for about 5 years when we set up the practice as one guaranteed form of income because there weren't any others. And but over the years, there must have been 300 or 400 students through that, and like that, people suddenly pop up and say, "Oh, I was there." So that's very interesting. So look, good to see a room full of you here. I guess it's preaching to the converted, really. I hope it is anyway this morning. But it's an important initiative, QDesign. I think if I can just give you a little bit of background to it. I'm not going to go through it chapter and verse because there's a bit in it, even though it's a pretty approachable and simple document. But I'd start off with just a little ad for the Queensland Government Architect, which John's given you a definition. But that's how we see our role. It has defined over the last 8 years. As I mentioned to John, we are the kind of office that sometimes, depending on the flavour of the government and the minister of the day, we are more or less popular. And over the 8 years I've been there, I've been in 4 departments, and we've had 9 ministers and 8 directors general, or the other way around. And that's indicative of support. Certainly the Deputy Premier took us out of Housing and Public Works where we began. And this piece of work was actually commenced when we were in her department, when she was Minister for Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning. And she's a very interested urbanist. And she gave us the additional responsibility of urban design within government, which is the basis of which this document was also prepared. The sort of things that we are currently involved with, because it's a very small office, we have to leverage within government, and we're not a design office, as I'm sure you all know, but we do get involved, and sometimes we have to find ways of leading the thinking to make sure that projects can be dealt with early. As you all know, if you don't get in the room early and make the design conversation happen early, it's very hard to have that conversation later. So we're in housing. There's a big program in housing, and we're running 20 demonstration projects that some of you here may be aware of. We're actively involved in the conversations with the Brisbane Metro and the Cross River Rail project. As you know, we've just last week announced the successful awarding of the 1,500-seat theatre at QPAC, and my not so pleasant task this week is debriefing the 4 unsuccessful proponents, which is nonetheless interesting and important to do. We've been involved with the new inner city high schools, the vertical schools on the 2 new sites, and having a pathway into education, which our office has not had. We get involved with planning. We're now a referral agency with the Urban Design Trigger, which some of you will have come across. And we get involved, of course, with education and all the other aspects that underpin good design. So what is QDesign? It's basically part of what we call a better design agenda within the context of planning policies in Queensland. And, you know, there's a city plan and there are state plans for all sorts of things. When we first entered into this, my approach was really, this has been done so many times before, surely we should take one of these documents and put a Queensland cover on it. Wouldn't that be a good way to do it? Because we all know when we go anywhere that the kind of principles that you come across are pretty similar to what makes a good design. There's been a lot of work done on it, a lot of good thinking, excellent work in CABE. You know, worldwide knowledge is strong. We know how to do it. So why don't we just rebadge something? Well, I was disavowed of that pretty early on. That certainly doesn't work, particularly in Queensland. So we designed this structure that we thought would have to have a unique Queensland flavour, even though the initiatives that we might be pushing are common to almost any place. We developed that structure. We've produced now QDesign, which is the important one, and we're advanced under Q Companion, which is a series of more detailed design publications that will support the principles of QDesign. We also decided that we had to keep it really simple. And I could just pause and make a slight detour here to say that you will notice that the cover, the whole nature of QDesign does not look like a government publication. And that was really a deliberate policy and was probably our hardest battle within government. Because as you know, governments love to badge everything with a government feel to it. That it's, you know, official, it's from the government, it's got lots of government logos on it and government livery and sort of government graphic design. And we made the case that this is a design document. It needs to feel and look different. We felt it needed to look like a magazine that you'd picked up that really celebrated in itself what is good design, that it had to say in its own presentation when it was there just by itself. And you can all download this, by the way. It's all up on the web. I have some hard copies, but it's a downloadable and has to work in the virtual environment. Now, that's not an easy task in government because the comms divisions of the various departments I've been through all say, well, that's all very nice, but it doesn't comply with the guidelines. And our answer usually was, well, the previous department approved it. And that causes frowns and concern. But we basically ended up with a champion in an important part of government who was prepared to let it through with certain conditions, and it does have government logos and things on it, and a welcome from the minister and all those sorts of things. But when you see the document, when you pick the document up, it feels and reads like a design magazine. And that was a very important part of underpinning what it does. Then at the beginning, we established a vision of these 9 principles, which are under 3 headings: working with context, establishing a strong structure, and demonstrating leadership. And then there are the 9 principles which I'm going to run you through quickly. We're not going to dive into them deeply, but I will run through each one of them with you. I've changed this presentation slightly to add in an additional image because this is part of what we can do with this. This audience has an interest in tall buildings, obviously, and urban issues and places of higher density. We can change this QDesign structure with different images for any audience. If you want to do QDesign health, we'll use health buildings. QDesign heritage, we can do it with heritage images. QDesign education, we've done one just for education, using just education images. So it's a format in the digital technology that we can dress it up to any particular audience. And so this is a unique presentation to you this morning, but it's based on the information that's in the core volume. So if we start off with principle number 1, be climate responsive. In fact, that kind of image, and we're trying to celebrate good design, we're trying to reference the architects behind each of the projects. And so we have a very simple statement. There are 9 of these statements. My minister loves this one, be climate responsive. It's, there is a strong mantra. As you know, right up until last weekend, there was a big debate around the importance of climate. That debate's not going to go away. I think, in fact, if anything, it's brought it up to another level of conversation, and a document like this will reinforce it. Then when you get to the next level, we have a set of actions, and then we have a set of strategies. And that's the common format. That's it for that principle. So what it means is when a local government wants to debate something, they often don't know where to start that debate. Well, they can start it very easily. Take that argument and look at those strategies and ask those questions of the project that they're evaluating. The design team can ask themselves those questions as well. Can they answer those questions? Does it help them guide their way through? With the urban design trigger that we are now administering, above certain projects get referred to us. We are only a referral agency. We do not have the ability to overrule anything, but we have a 2-stage approval process, and we use the QDesign structure to write our reports, to have our conversations with proponents when they come in, and it helps a structured conversation to occur. And again, any project can be approached and analysed under these headings. So the second one, we found this image just yesterday, is the Torbreck building in South Brisbane, which is now, I think, coming up. We've got it in open house again this year. It's a company title building, but nonetheless private ownership. Some very interesting design principles in that building. I think it was a 1960s, late 60s building. Just the other thing about QDesign, and I keep saying to my department, we know how to do things. We've done them very well in the past, and we keep forgetting. Or the pressures come on to, it's just we've been sitting at the table talking about flammable cladding and various other issues. How do these things come through when we know, in fact, how to do things better? And there's a lot of reasons for it. And so sometimes it's very important to go back and look at what you did in the past and how it was actually a good answer at the time. So same structure and action, and a set of strategies. The working and enhancing with natural systems, landscaping, character and biodiversity, that's a slightly more specific, it's very well to say be climate responsive, but that's quite site specific, that kind of approach, and understanding the performance of the building, understanding the context in which it's operating. And again, such a complex and difficult task I have found all my career, planting of trees. You would think that is so obvious, and yet I can't tell you how many times I've had that debate, and I'm sure you've all had that debate about the difficulty in actually putting in the landscape that will mature and grow into something of substance long term. It's obvious, and yet you really need to have the arguments to make the case so often. Create well-defined, legible and connected streets and spaces. Again, a kind of statement that's not controversial. Actually, nothing in this is controversial. It's all straightforward. But again, don't do it with images. Go back to the actions. I like this image, and you can tell a story from that. That's James Street. As we all know, and I'm sure you've all been down and seen the extraordinary transformation that's happened. Now, really over 25 years, it's in its 3rd wave on some of the sites there, I think. Very unusual to have had a single developer who's done a great deal of it. Very unusual to have one architectural firm who's done a considerable amount of that work. But if you think about the argument of Brisbane, timber and tin, this is the antithesis. This is, masonry and breathing masonry and concrete and greenery. But I think a very appropriate subtropical response, a good urban response, the kind of image that is new Brisbane. So many of the principles of QDesign that are in that precinct But it began with a rezoning in Brisbane City Council, a desire to renew a place. It began with Trevor Redcliffe being a strong personality who drove the change. But the principles of QDesign, if you go back and re-examine the James Street precinct, you find so many of them have actually been built into the project. Create great places for people to live, a public housing project there, a project in Toowoomba to illustrate this, which was actually the Toowoomba City Council taking a building and demolishing it to build a link between two parts of Toowoomba. Those of you who spend any time of Toowoomba, and I've spent time there on and off over many years now, but they've only recently discovered that they're a laneway city. Well, the laneways haven't recently arrived. What has recently arrived is an understanding that that structure in the city is an asset they've always had. And now, of course, it's become a real feature of Toowoomba, and they're actually embracing it and putting policies in play that really have transformed the way that that CBD is operating. Now, if you look at this particular one, and one of those strategies, I can't quite read it from here, but yesterday I had an inquiry from one part of our department writing some policy work about designing for children and old people. And they sent me, a 20-page document at 10 o'clock and said, could I track change and have it all ready for them by 2 o'clock that afternoon? They've been working on it for many months, I think, but suddenly someone has said, oh, you better ask the government architect about that. So we didn't do that, but what we did was say, why don't you reference QDesign, just one para, reference QDesign, and one of those I'm pretty sure you'll find there's a reference to children, designing for children. If it's not in this policy, it's in another one. But that kind of thing is where it starts to bite. Government is a big player in influencing attitudes and decisions around design. They often don't know they are. And a document like this in their hands, which has been approved, can then be written into all sorts of other policies. We don't have to be in the room for that. The hard work is getting this document out there and getting it approved. But then all the other analysis that goes on in government, if we keep bringing them back to this document, slowly it will get embedded into all sorts of government work. And the more that you can reference it as well, the more you can bring it to people's attention. Because I say it's not controversial, it helps you and it helps others have the conversation early and talk about the right things. The sixth policy was delivering diverse and well-integrated development forms and density. Again, uncontroversial. We've tried to use interesting examples. That's the Brisbane Girls Grammar School building of now, I think, must be getting on a bit, but 15 years perhaps, was a national award winner. A totally different way. We're talking now about vertical high schools. We've had them for quite some time. It's not a new idea, but what does need to be done well is the way it's approached on a site-specific basis. And a set of actions and a set of strategies once again. Embedding opportunities for adaptive reuse. As we know, in the process we've just been through with the QPAC competition, where we have post-war heritage now coming to the fore, there's a whole new set of complexes that will need to follow these kind of principles. I've been through the process of, with an interesting group, to look at the conservation management plan for the QPAC precinct. There will be many more buildings like that over the years to come. And so developing actions and strategies for adaptive reuse, very important part of this document. Leading by example, we found this image yesterday. This is an image from BVN for the vertical high school. Probably not many of you have seen this. I hadn't seen it till yesterday. This is the Dutton Park concept for that site near Boggo Road. Again, utilising, the whole design has been done, utilising straightforward QDesign principles. And lastly, the idea of engaging effectively, which is the design competition, and having conversations about design where when we can create it. This is a shot of one of the Pechakucha nights from Brisbane Open House. The conversations around design is a really important issue. John Flynn was just telling me at breakfast about the project that they entered in Melbourne, where I think there were 5 major developers who each paid a good fee to put in a concept for a huge project. They presented to the developer and then to the public the next day, and people paid $50, $60 for a ticket to go and hear the design presentations. And how many people, John, were in the room? 1,500 people. So that's a nice little earner, which is good for design, to have that kind of conversation in the public domain where people come and actually put their case. And we've seen very little of that, and I'm sure we can do a great deal more of it in the future. So I think that's the structure. I hope you see that it's graphically friendly, it's easy to read, you can keep going back to it and finding more in it. There's actually quite a considerable body of work went into doing it, even though the principles I know are very similar to many other documents that are dealing with the same topic. It is uniquely Queensland focused. Every image, every project is a Queensland project, and that is important also for government to embrace it. It's important for local government to embrace it, and it's important for you to understand it, to make the case for any of the projects that you might be doing. And that's it for me. Thank you.
We've got some time for questions. Anybody got a pressing question to put to Malcolm?
Malcolm, have any of the local authorities sort of taken this on board, endorsed it, using it already, Brisbane City, Moreton Bay?
Interesting, that's a good question. When we were testing this, one of the things we did was we involved Leah Lang, who's the city architect on the Gold Coast, and she asked us to do a Gold Coast version, which we did, and we took down, and she arranged for us to meet Tom Tate, and we presented a Gold Coast version of that to him a couple of years ago. And he got it straight away. He said, yep, that's good, you need to take that to the Council of Mayors. And the Council of Mayors, he said, I'll arrange to get it on the next agenda. Now, the Council of Mayors a couple of years ago is not quite the same Council of Mayors that it is now. It hasn't got as many mayors, but we did present it because Tom took us in, and Graham Quirk chaired it, and I did a similar presentation but a shorter, sharper version, and they signed it off on the spot. So it has Council of Mayors support, which was a major achievement in actually getting the state government to sign it off, because they hadn't signed it off. But when we kept saying, well, the Council of Mayors have endorsed it. So, it's all part of the process of getting people to buy in. But the answer is yes. I'm going up to Fraser Coast next month to talk to them. They want a version, conversation for them. I've been up to Toowoomba and we've talked about it there. I've done a talk on the Gold Coast again. So yeah, we're going around to all the major areas slowly during the year.
Other questions? I have one, Malcolm. You showed the companions coming up there. There was apartment and housing. Is that going to become slightly a bit more like the New South Wales and Victorian apartment design? A bit more.
Well, we hope it probably won't be as big as CEP 65, which is a giant document, although a very good one. The Victorian one is quite different in its approach. We are trying to work on an apartment sort of approach here. We haven't got enough funding to do that currently. So the most advanced one we've done is the first one is on streets, and that's 90% finished. I'm hoping we'll get that out by the end of the year. But if you saw the list there, apartments is definitely a push for that. The Institute of Architects have also got thinking in that, and they're pushing for that as well.
And our next presentation here is on smart cities. Does QDesign delve into smart technologies?
Well, definitely. I mean, it's embedded in a great many of those individual things, but we've worked with Adam, and in fact we consulted with him partly with this and some of the other work we're doing. But the smart tech, again, we could do a QDesign smart cities. That's what we're finding with the document. You pick an area of interest and apply that filter into that area, and then with you can convene a small group of interested and smart people who know about that topic, and you can all do that around your own areas of expertise. And we could certainly do a QDesign smart cities kind of version of that, no question. And what it's really about is just a methodical way of asking design-based questions and thinking and capturing design thinking in the process that you're solving on a particular site. But when it comes to city making, it's a little bit more complex, of course. But nonetheless, the same sorts of questions are being asked.
No other last question? Anybody's pressing? All right, thank you, Malcolm. I might invite Lawrence Tomato up for the vote of thanks.
Thanks, John. Conrad Gargat's really pleased to support this morning's breakfast talk. I'd like to thank Malcolm for that presentation. I'd also like to thank Malcolm for his dedication to the Queensland Government Architect's Office over a long period of time. As you may have read a little bit of pain in the 8 or 9 years and ministers that you've had to deal with. So I know it is a big challenge. We live in a fantastic state, and we can't take that for granted. It needs to be designed, and I think Malcolm and his team certainly are champions to make sure that we continue to enjoy what it is to live in this wonderful part of Australia. So I would like to thank you and your team for continually pushing the bar in architecture and urban design. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lawrence. Just one little reminder before I let you go. On Thursday, the 25th of July, back here with Adam Beck, the Executive Director of Smart City Council of Australia and New Zealand. You should have an email in about a month's time, I guess. We don't go too early. But thank you all for coming along, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thanks, guys.